So let's talk a little bit about textures, and we'll do that with the cube. So if you go into the windows, you'll see it has a bunch of different modeling, animation, rendering, kind of similar to what's over here as well, actually. But here's the windows, here's the rendering editors, and attached to that there's a hypershade. Hypershade refers to the shaders associated to the that you choose to associate textures to the group. For example, if I went into blend, let's make it a little larger. If I went to a blend, you would see that this is a blend texture, and if I change the look of it here by making it a little darker, you see that there's a reflective surface here that acts as a specular highlight. I can change, for example, a specular color. The brighter it goes, the more the specular highlight reacts, and the darker it is, the less it reacts. Reflectivity is different. You can see how it's different down here, and each one of these you can put a map in. So, for example, if I put a reflective map, it would reflect the environment around it. So if I had a map of a sky, it would be blue, up reflected into the sphere here. Lambert, conversely, does not have has ambient color, but it doesn't actually have a specular highlight. So you can see the difference. It's very smooth. There's no reflectivity, and so it does not reflect the sky, or it would not have a specular highlight like an apple or an eye or something that's shiny. It would just be this non-reflective sort of Pantone surface. So with that in mind, it's great to build with, because if I were to apply, for example, this Lambert to this block, and I were to change its color just a little bit, you'd see how it just is a simple block that can be read very, very easily. If it has more of a blend surface to it, then it tends to be more reflective, as you can see. And because these are just straight surfaces, they are very shiny if they are purely catching the specular highlight. For example, if I turn the specular highlight up a bit here, it might turn quite white, you see, when it hits the exact specular highlight angle, reflecting off the light. So that right there is a summary of what each shader does when it's applied to the object. This right here is a very complex, it's like a hypergraph of the individual color, ambient color, etc., which are all here, and how they apply to the shader group. So you have the Lambert applied to the shader group, which then applies to the object. I would prefer, just for the sake of ease, if we would go to the browser, and you'll see also that this is a quick way to browse, and you can just grab this by right-clicking on this, and you can drag and drop it. In this case, there's a bunch of Lamberts we've created. By every single time I click on one of these buttons, I create a new object. I just created that. So I can also go in and one by one I can delete these, and you can see how I'm just deleting them, and I can narrow it down to, let's just say, one I want. Let's just say this is the one I want to keep. I put that on, and there it is. Here's a Lambert here. Put that on, and now it's on the object. This is like a source code, and a more complicated version of it, and maybe in time we can explain it. But you can do fancy graphic effects when you can get this deep into the code, and this is like a node view of what's happening, and this is the way that you would explore it. You could break it down into almost nothing, or you can expand it into everything like this. Anyway, back to the shading node here. So let's just go with the Lambert. We'll double click on that, and then I'll bring up this. We will change that to a nice, let's just say, blue. Okay. And this right now is our color. So this being a camera view, we are looking at this through a camera. And if we were to go into, let's just say, the panel and create a new perspective view, we could see, if I select this camera here, this camera, this view right here, we're looking through a certain location, certain spot. And this, if I created a different one, this is that spot. So if I were to rotate this camera a little bit and look around this object, you'll see how this camera is going around this object, and we're seeing it go around the object in this view. Also, if I were to go into my my attribute editor here, I might be able to find a way to change the focal length. Now, hopefully you know how the camera works in general, but if you don't, the focal length of our eyes is about 50, 55 maybe. So by setting this to 55, that means this camera right here is set to the same view as we would have in our everyday life. So someone was asking yesterday about how virtual reality works. Well, if we are the camera looking around, the computer attaches the angle that we look at. In this case, let's just say we are looking through this lens here. We would turn like our head right to left, and then it would do the same thing to this, and that's how we would see this cube in space. We would be looking around. That right there is the camera. That's right here. So if I select this camera again, it's going to be this camera looking here is right there. So you can see how this is literally like a representation of space. And to try and even go further to explain that, I will expand this up to the point where it is so large that now we are literally inside this here. We're inside the cube. So here it is outside the cube, and we are looking inside here. So this can be a little world. I wouldn't use, frankly, a cube as this world. I would use actually a sphere. So why don't we try that out? I would take this sphere and I would make it so big that we were inside it. There we go. So it's a massive sphere, and we live now inside it. So you can imagine you're in almost a planetarium, and now you're looking inside this huge space, looking up, looking down, and this is the inside of this space. This is also a good time to introduce the idea of UVs. So here is your cube again. So I'll come together in a second. But if I were to go into a texturing editor, here is our UV editor. And if you were to unwrap a shirt and you would have different panels and you could lay them all out, that would be the same concept as unwrapping these faces. So here's a face right here, is unwrapped, and when it hits the flat surface that you see here, it has a UV associated to where it is on this flat plane. So this here has been unwrapped. Here's the top, for example, and you can see how this here, 1, 2, 3, 4, here, are the 4 different points here. If this, for example, is these points, better examples for my faces. So here's this face is this face. This face is that face over here. So you can see how every one of these faces have been laid out separately, separated by the seam here, right? And laid out flat so that we can apply a texture to it. Those are UVs. Now you can imagine if you were to create a wall, let's just say you wanted something like this big, and this is the wall of an object, then you'd say, okay, well, I want to put this wall against, I'll raise it up a bit, I'll move it, let's just see, grab these vertices, we'll move it up to the, to the ground plane here, and then I create another one of these, let's just say, and whoopsie, grab another one of these. And another one, rotate it around by 90 degrees. Move it over here. Scale it. Move it. And you can see how you're starting to build walls. Now, how you want these walls to push together, how accurate you want it to be is up to you. Maybe you want to start building these extremely accurately, so you'll basically measure out how big this will be. And then you start from there. Maybe the whole thing, for example, should be a lot larger, and so you'll scale the whole thing up. Maybe it should be smaller. You want it to be a tiny house, so you'll scale it all down. But anyway, regardless, you would have a texture on the wall here, on only this face, that you'd want to look a certain way. Maybe it's brick on the outside. Maybe it's a painted color on the inside. And with this program, you can basically associate a shader to individual parts of this home in a way that you're building, these walls that you're building. You can detach them, or you can just basically build it separately. So I'll give you an example of that. So let's just say we push this in a little bit, and we duplicated this. Grab that, duplicated it. Now there's two. And then we've got the editor. Actually, no, the render hypershade. We then take a Lambert. Now let's just take another blend again. Lambert's easy. And we associate that Lambert to this object. You can see how that's now a different object. I can take a different color. I can take this face, and I can associate, let's just say, this texture here to that actual face alone. So you can see how you can easily even take, either double it and make a wall on the outside and the inside, or you can just take the face from one side of this polygon mesh, this cube that I've shrunk down, and that can be textured separately.